I am Andy Mack. The professional wrestling world continuing to grapple with the loss of a giant with handlebar mustache, and that being Hulk Hogan, passing away unexpectedly today at the age of 71 as authorities responded to his Clearwater, Florida home there about a call of cardiac arrest. And of course, the mustachioed, headscarf wearing icon of professional wrestling turned the sport into a massive business and a cultural touchstone. Of course, undeniable what he did for the game, defined professional wrestling, and just so much as the name recognition. Certainly so impressive with Hulk Hogan, and he will be missed. Let's be joined right now by a guy that spent nearly 2 decades with WWE commenting on all of this, the coach, Jonathan Coachman himself. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And of course, losing Hulk Hogan today is a very sad story, but the legacy that he left is incredible. What do you think of when you heard the news today?
So we had kind of heard, we had some inside sources telling us that it wasn't doing too well, that he wasn't doing too well, and then he got transferred back home. And I think today was even shocked those that were closest to him because he had been moved back home. But it's been no secret the last several months that his health has been deteriorating. But the reason I thought that he was going to kick out and make it is because he's promoting this new, or was promoting the new wrestling venture with Eric Bischoff, going to be on Fox. In August, they just landed a TV deal. So certainly I was shocked because when you ask the question, what do you think of? I think of my childhood. And there are certain athletes, and I'm a gigantic sports fan, a gigantic wrestling fan. And there are certain athletes that, boom, you stop and go, man, that goes back to when I was 8, 9. And when I think of Hulk Hogan, I think of naps. My dad was a minister. I had to take a nap on Saturdays just to stay up and watch Saturday night's main event. He took it into the mainstream. And having gone from WWE to ESPN and what I dealt with, I have a newfound appreciation for what he went through back in the 80s when he was trying to make pro wrestling a mainstream thing, because it's very much a bubble. And those that are in the bubble know it. Those are outside really don't pay attention to it. But Hulk Hogan is one of the rare cats, Andy, that when he's walking down the street, you know exactly who he is. And there are very, very few individuals that are like that.
And you mentioned just the figure. They don't make him like Hulk Hogan anymore because the standing out with the blonde hair and the handlebar mustache, the red and yellow, and of course tearing apart the shirt. Always, you just know that face when you see it. Can we talk about the rise of Hulk Hogan, though? Because started back in the 70s, really made a name for himself in the 80s. WrestleMania came around. Can we talk about the rise? Was there anything in particular that really made Hulk Hogan who he was? Why his popularity grew so quickly?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I can comfortably say this. I was a part of 17 WrestleManias. They're at like number 42 now. So I've been a part of a lot of them. And without Hulk Hogan, without WrestleMania 1, the WWE that we know today would not exist. There was everything on the line. He was what they used to call the Golden Goose. Chief Jay Strongbow would call him, oh, the Golden Goose has arrived. And all of the wrestlers wanted to be on the same card as him because they were always sold out. He made the most money. He made other guys the most money. I call him, Andy, the Tiger Woods of professional wrestling. Tiger Woods made all the other golfers rich. That's exactly what Hulk Hogan did. But also the rise of wrestling into the 80s and the 90s. And then when he made the very strategic decision to go to the WCW, the rivals, if you will, and become a bad guy. He was the biggest baby face in the business. Everybody loved it. There were Saturday morning cartoons of Hulk Hogan and the WWE. There was Saturday night. He was everywhere. Then he became a movie star in Rocky III. The Rocky series is my favorite of all time. And so when you came to watch Sly Stallone, all of a sudden you got 6'9", 320-pound dude who's fighting Sylvester Stallone. So all of a sudden, that's pretty cool. And so while he's doing that, because Vince McMahon never liked, even when I was there, he didn't like people to go outside of the WWE because you risk losing them. And it happened with The Rock. It happened with John Cena. It happened with other guys who became movie stars and they left the wrestling business behind. But Vince knew back then, well, we have to let Hulk Hogan do this stuff because we need that mainstream attention. So it was a very smart move. And he had so many ups and downs in his career. But the one thing that never waned was his popularity until at the end, a lot of guys, they stay a little bit too long, at least in the ring. he was one of those, but it's hard to tell somebody to
Yeah.
stop when there's still a lot of money out there to be made.
You can't hang up the mustache, the handlebars too soon for Hulk Hogan. You can't just tell him
Yeah.
to do that. But let's talk about something about him because obviously, like you mentioned, babyface, but he did have a heel turn, NWO, and that was a choice, a very dramatic choice to make that. The character arc of some of these wrestlers is so very fascinating as well. The rise and then the turn. How focused was he on that? How in tune with the audience was he to kind of create that arc for him that even though he was so popular that he could make this decision to go the other way and still be so notable?
To compare the heel turn that's going on right now with John Cena, John Cena at one point was selling 37% of every dollar was his merchandise. So when you just become a bad guy, people don't buy merchandise of a bad guy. The reason that Hogan decided to do it back then, he didn't have a ton of merch like the guys do today. He had basically one shirt yellow, one shirt red. That was it. But when he went to the WCW, what made it so lucrative for him is he knew if I could become a gigantic heel or bad guy, he was making $5-6 million a year, even in the 90s. All of a sudden, now you can create some of the biggest baby faces or good guys in the business. And you have to have both in order for everything to grow. That led to 83 weeks of being number one over the WWF at the time that turned into the WWE. So, yes, calculated, but also because I was a heel myself, it's so much more fun, Andy, to be a bad guy, to talk trash, to have people boo you. And the louder the boos are, the more you love it and the more you know you're doing your job. And I can't even imagine for a guy like Hogan to get the boos when he was so used to for 10, 12 years to being universally cheered. But it's music to your ears because that means this. That means money.
Touching. That's so very cool. And yeah, obviously what he was obviously worth. They're paying you what you're worth. I want to ask you on a personal level because we know Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea is his given name. When you were just talking with him, maybe off stage because he enjoyed the spotlight so much, were there any stories that come to mind? Did he take on Hulk Hogan or did he ever go back to being just Terry?
So that never happens. The one thing that you do in the wrestling business, you go by one name. It's too hard to walk down and let's say we're calling you the curly haired assassin, and then your name is Andy. Well, we're not going to call you both. And so I've always been the coach. Hulk was always just Hulk. Undertaker was just Taker. And so the one thing about the wrestling business, and The Rock taught me this because I was very close to him, is it's your personality, your real one, turned up 10 notches. So you better create something. And that's the one thing I've always believed in my entire career, whether it was ESPN, WWE. And for Hulk Hogan, I believe that Terry Bollea was that just turned up 10 notches. The other thing is no matter where you go, even though they don't preach it right now because Netflix, it's a show and then they're a regular person, you're Hulk Hogan 24/7. When you check into a hotel and a person is standing next to you waiting for a picture or an autograph, they're not asking Terry Bollea for his autograph. They're asking Hulk Hogan. So there is no turning it off. Almost everybody, I would say 90%, go by their, we call it gimmick name. And Hulk was no different. He was always just Hulk.
This is just so fascinating to me. And that leads me into my next question because we talk about how it's hard for guys to tell him to hang it up. Do you think that wore on him? Do you think the wrestling, just being Hulk Hogan day in and day out, wore on him and wore him down?
Yeah, there's no question about that because you're factoring in all of the matches. I believe at last count it was over 30 surgeries. His classic leg drop, his finishing move, on the surface it looks very very basic. What it did was wreck his back, wreck his knees, wreck his hips because it is night after night just landing on that thing over and over and over. And then you factor in the travel. They were on the road sometimes 6 to 8 weeks at a time. When I was in the WWE, my first 5 years, I missed one Monday. I missed one Monday in my first 10 total. And we were on the road Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So all of that wears you down. And then you don't want to go back to your hotel room. So you stay at the bar every night and you drink because there is an intoxication of hanging out with wrestling fans at hotels or at nightclubs or whatever it is. And when you're on the road that much. So I think it was a collection of everything. And obviously I wasn't there, when I was a kid to see everything he was putting into his body. But whether it was beer or whatever, it all, I think, took a toll. And whatever happened today and whatever the cardiac event was, I think it was just a matter of it was just time because the wrestling business will beat your body up 1,000 different ways. I was so lucky to get out with only a couple of bruises and a couple of scars is about it.
Yeah, and obviously they didn't want to put that forward. They kind of showcase what they are, and they push through the pain to give the fans, the audience, what they rightly deserve. TMZ was talking to Ric Flair earlier on today, and he said they just spoke to him yesterday. So this coming out of nowhere. How close are the wrestlers? Because you know you have different rivalries, you have different conflicts that happen in the ring or a little bit outside the ring. How close is that group?
Very, very close. And you ride together. I found, I rode with the same two guys for 3 years when I started doing house shows. And Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan are very similar in age. So I can imagine that they were very, very close. You also have to understand that just like in the NFL, you're putting your body on the line, you're trusting the other person. And then you factor in there are millions of dollars at play. We're talking about two of the biggest stars in the business who worked with other big stars in the business. So when you're up and down the highways, when you're in the same locker room, the only division was when you'd arrive overseas, we'd put good guys in one bus and bad guys in another bus to have the perception that when we get out at the Hilton or the Hyatt or whatever, that we don't get along. But the truth of the matter is we all got along very, very well for the most part. There were some guys, but I'm sure you don't get along with everybody you work with. I don't get along with everybody I work with, but you have to respect it because when you're out on the road that much, and then you have to go into the arena and the ring, and you're trying to sell 20,000 tickets every single night. You have to support each other. So I saw Ric Flair's reaction today on TMZ. I think it's very real. I think it's the combination of he's also in his 70s, and when you're forced to look at your own mortality, it can make you very, very emotional. And I think for a guy like Ric Flair, because there's very few guys from that era in the 80s and the 70s that are still around, even alive, let alone in the wrestling business.
Yeah, and what a character Ric Flair is, too. So I think it also makes you appreciate guys like Ric Flair and what they are. And since they're still around, I want to ask you, because you have kind of traversed a different world with the WWE, but also with ESPN and SportsCenter. You've covered all of the sports like the NFL, the NBA, all these sorts of sports. How does it compare? Because obviously what they're doing in the ring is so very impressive. The characters that they build is so very impressive. Is there any overlap in your eyes? Because like you mentioned, him in the ring with Sylvester Stallone, towering over him, just the powerful nature of him. He might not be a defensive lineman per se, but does it compare at all to other sports, to the NFL?
Well, I will say this, that the physical work I did to get in the ring when I became a bad guy, I was forced to learn how to what we call bump, because you can't talk trash and not be willing to get beat up. Physically, hardest thing I've ever done. And I played college basketball, I played baseball, I played all the sports. Nothing compares to the physical of just learning, just running the rope. Andy, I can promise you, you'd go back and forth a couple of times, you'd be done. It is so difficult. It will beat your body up because you play a lot longer than you would in the NFL. Average career is 3.2 years. Guys will stay in wrestling for 30, 40 years if they're allowed, and because they're big stars. So certainly there's a lot there. And I can tell you that a lot of NFL players over the years have tried it. Hell, we got Jelly Roll right now participating at SummerSlam. It's intoxicating. It's fun. And a lot of celebrities over the years, because I had to deal with most of them, they come in, and a lot of entertainers or musicians, they're small. And they did it because they couldn't play basketball. They couldn't play football. So they become, I remember working with Kenny Chesney at ESPN. He's like 5'6". Well, they're not big enough to be in the wrestling business, but they'd like to be. They'd like to try it because it's fun. It's outside the box. So it's incredibly physical. And I think that it's as physical, if not more, than the NFL. Because the NFL, you're playing 17 games a year. That's it. In the WWE, you're doing 4 matches a week, or at least when I was there, 52 weeks a year. That's over 200 matches a year. Think about that for a second. And if you're in a main event, you're talking 25, 30 minutes a night. And then getting in the car and driving a minimum, we had to be at least 175 miles apart so that tickets don't overlap. So you're driving at least 600 miles a week at 6'9", 7 feet, 400 pounds, 300 pounds. Think about that. If you're watching this right now, how would you feel? NFL players don't have to do that. They're flying private jets, flying back home, then they're home. So to me, the lifestyle and the travel is what physically makes it demanding. And then on top of that, the matches. So I would put it above. And I remember a couple of MMA stars back in the day. They were at a WrestleMania, Tito Ortiz. I asked Tito Ortiz, I said, "You think you can do this?" He goes, "Hell no, coach. That's way too hard for me." And this is a UFC champion that told me that.
Yeah, it's the grind. It is something that people obviously don't see, so they don't get to fully grasp. But like you mentioned, obviously the demand, the physical demands, the mental demands as well of what you have to do on a nightly basis there to perform. Coach, before I let you go, is there a moment, a story of Hulk Hogan that jumps to mind when you think of him that will be his legacy in professional wrestling and beyond?
I think there's two, and I was a part of one of them. I think the first one is WrestleMania 3, the classic, iconic Hogan, Andre the Giant stare down. You know, Andre was really hurting at the time, and the big thing was, would Hulk Hogan body slam him or not? And the famous story is that Andre loved to pull pranks on people, and he pulled a prank on Hogan that day by not allowing him in the dressing room to talk to him. So Hogan didn't, and Hogan told me this story himself. He didn't know until they went out if he was even going to be able to body slam him because Andre wouldn't tell him. Because at 500 pounds, you got to help him get up or you ain't getting him up. The other one was WrestleMania 18 in Toronto. You're talking about the biggest star in Hogan ever against the biggest star at the time in The Rock, who's become obviously an icon. And we never thought we would see that match. We did. And what made it so cool is I did a little skit with The Rock beforehand where I was interviewing him. Then I said my prayers and I ate my vitamins. And it was a ton of fun. It was one of the very few times in my career where I walked out onto the floor to watch something because we could be a distraction. And we watched two of the biggest stars ever be in the moment, 60, 70, 80,000, whatever was in the building on pay-per-view. And they stood there, I kid you not, for 10 minutes. And it looked like they were talking trash. What they were doing was reversing the match that they had worked on for weeks because there's a certain way you perform as a heel. There's a certain way you perform as a baby face. Andy, if I'm a heel, I could punch you in the face. If you're a baby face, you can't punch me in the face because good guys don't do that. So imagine working for weeks and then you get in there and the crowd's cheering for the wrong guy. Wow. They were so in the moment. I remember standing there watching going, hey, how did a little kid from Kansas get to this point in Toronto, Canada, all this way from home? And how did I get so lucky to watch two of the guys that I admire so much from a wrestling standpoint as a kid and as a young man growing up, watching them 30 feet away literally hold the audience in the palm of their hand. Very few can do it. I got to be there being a part of it. Those are my two.
That is incredible. And thank you so much for sharing those because, like you mentioned, it's just incredible to see the iconic nature of Hulk Hogan, what he was able to do for fans here in the United States, but also globally, and just the just symbolic nature of him. Just the face, like we mentioned at the beginning, that you see him on the street, you know that is Hulk Hogan. You see him kind of all the merchandise. You know what Hulkamania is all about. All right, Coach, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your insight.